Gosh, this has already been a service worth attending. And I think if I were Amanda, thank you for the personal story. Sharing your hearts with us. Yeah. Thank you, band, for giving us some hope, which is sorely needed by so many people in our place today and around the world. When visiting with the family a few weeks ago about a funeral for one of their friends, the family I was visiting with, a couple, told me that the deceased had talked with her just a few days before he died and about the afterlife. And she said that he told her, "I believe in God, but don't you wonder about the afterlife?" "What do you think," he asked, "about reincarnation?" And then he mentioned his wife, whose funeral I conducted about a year ago. He said, I was hoping that Shirley might come back to me, but she never did." And there was such a tinge of sadness in those words. I don't know what you think about reincarnation. Somehow, I am way ahead of myself. The slide that I had is not up there, so I'll read it. I don't believe in the reincarnation, but I'm open to anything that lets me come back and finish my Netflix series. So I ask you what this man asked his friend. Don't you ever wonder about the afterlife? A CBS Vanity Fair poll showed that 48% of us are dying to know what happens after we die. 45% of us had rather know the meaning of life. I'm wondering if those two areas meld together. Maybe when we grasp death, we can better live our life. Dr. Grayson, Bruce Grayson, has done extensive studies in the area of near-death experiences. And he says this: NDEs usually lead to an enhanced sense of meaning and purpose in life, increased joy in everyday things, decreased fear of death, and a greater sense of this is so cool to me, the interconnectedness among all people, and a belief that all religions share certain core values. NDEs often lead to a paradoxical decrease in devotion to any one religious tradition, despite a greater awareness of guidance by and connection to a higher power. This NDE brings us closer to the spiritual being, but it diminishes the need to separate and to have one group against another group. Boy, I think we all need an NDE. Just a quick one, yes. One that we definitely can come back from. So as we gather today at the conclusion of our series that we're calling The Good Place, based upon that TV show, it is a show that dared to ask the question that keeps us awake at night: what happens when we die? The question is as old as humanity itself. Every culture, every religion, probably everyone in here, every individual on the planet throughout history has grappled with this mystery. A few years ago, a hospice nurse said this about her patients: they all want to know, whether they ask out loud or not, what comes next. Whether they die afraid or peaceful often depends on the answer they've come to believe. And we have been brought to believe a certain thing based upon our religious heritage, our religious training, or the lack thereof. So we all live with the question: what happens after we die, when this life ends? When this life ends, is it just over? Or do we have a test that we have to pass? Is there judgment? Is there a reunion? Is there a second chance? So this series on The Good Place, based upon that quirky but very profound television show, invites us to think more deeply about that question. It even invites us to laugh at death, which is something that we need to do because death can be very scary. We all know Walt Disney and love Walt Disney. When we think of Walt Disney and all the things that Disney has produced, we think of warm feelings, entertainment. We think of leaving the theater with happy thoughts. That's what Walt Disney is all about. But in the year 1909, 7-year-old Walt Disney was playing in the backyard of his family's farmhouse in northern Missouri. And he saw this big brown owl. And he decided as a 7-year-old to sneak up on that owl. And he reached out and grabbed it. And when he grabbed the owl, of course, the owl freaked out. And when the owl freaked out, Walt Disney freaked out. And he, out of fear and just surprise, Walt Disney threw the owl on the ground and stomped it to death. According to his biographers, that owl haunted him for years and produced in him a morbid fear of death. Well, Disney's first big hit featured that little mouse called Mickey Steamboat Willie. But he immediately followed up the success of Steamboat Willie with this cartoon called The Skeleton Dance. The Skeleton Dance opens with a terrified owl perched in a tree, followed by a bunch of skeletons coming up out of the ground. Disney's distributor complained. He said, "Walt, we don't want this gruesome crap. Give us more mice." One scholar of the entertainment world said if Disney was a mouthpiece for an American way of life, the force of his voice depended on a curious obsession with death. And so many of his movies did deal with death. From Pinocchio to Snow White, his personal life was focused on death. His daughter, Denise, said that Disney, when he was in his young 30s, hired a fortune teller to tell him when he was going to die. And she told him he was going to die at 35. So he busied himself. He became a workaholic and driven to success. He was hoping that working so hard would distract not just him, it would distract the Grim Reaper. Well, he passed 35, and he thought, well, maybe I misheard the fortune teller, maybe it's 55. Well, he passed 55, and he died at 65. I think it was around 1967. Walt Disney, a morbid fear of death. International musician Sting has won 16 Grammy Awards. He's sold over 100 million records. In an interview he did several years ago with Rolling Stone, the then 64-year-old, he's 73 now, so 11 years ago, he admitted that he has spent a lot of time and still does thinking about death. He thinks about the rock stars from the past who died, whether it's Buddy Holly or John Lennon and David Bowie and Prince. One time after performing before 100,000 fans in Australia, he just went back to his hotel room to be alone. And he says, thinking about having more days behind me than in front of me. Sting was raised a Catholic. And he says this, I've been thinking about death since I was a kid. I get a kind of spiritual vertigo. I was brought up in a religious background with ideas of eternity, eternal torment, or eternal heaven. I became obsessed with it, maybe morbid. He attempted to face death and deal with his fear by regularly taking a psychedelic drug. And he says, I think it's a way of rehearsing the feeling of being dead. Every time I have to work up the courage to do it, you basically face your mortality, and it's as if you're dead out of time. Most people die in total panic and terror. I think there's another way we're supposed to die. There must be a way to die peacefully and welcoming. Well, in The Good Place, our favorite philosopher, Chidi, offers one of the most beautiful metaphors I've ever read, and they picture it so well in this particular scene from The Good Place. In this final season of The Good Place, Eleanor and Chidi are talking about their life, and they are sharing their final goodbye. And take a look at this scene.
was ever good at being sad. Partly because my mom straight up told me not to be. But this is sad, man. You got a John Locke quote or a piece of Kantian wisdom you can throw at me?
Those guys were more focused on the rules and regulations. For spiritual stuff, you gotta turn to the east.
I'll take anything you got. Hit me.
Picture a wave in the ocean. You can see it, measure it, its height, the way the sunlight refracts when it passes through, and it's there, and you can see it, you know what it is, it's a wave. And then it crashes on the shore, and it's gone. But the water is still there. The wave was just a different way for the water to be for a little while. And that's one conception of death for a Buddhist. The wave returns to the ocean, where it came from, and where it's supposed to be.
Not bad, Buddhists.
Not bad. None of this is bad.
I need you to do me one last favor.
Mm-hmm.
Say goodbye to me now and leave before I wake up.
Well, let's be honest. Most of us did not grow up with that idea of death, of poetry, of waves returning to the ocean. Most of us grew up like Sting, a lot of fear. So what I want us to do today is understand this. God is not running a fear factory. He's not grading us on a cosmic test. God is putting together a puzzle of love, and you are right now part of that picture. So what I want us to understand today is to dismantle that fear factory. Don't follow God out of terror, but out of love that frees us and transforms us. A lot of us were told about hell before we were told about love. A lot of us were scared into salvation. I remember growing up, altar calls that felt more like TSA checkpoints than they did invitations to grace. There was fire and there was brimstone, and they were charged with arrows pointing to heaven or pointing to hell. And it was all based, our destination, on saying a single prayer at the right moment using the right formula. Yeah, we were told God loves you, but also God might burn you forever. You know, that kind of theology warps your soul. It makes love conditional and life transactional, and it makes death terrifying. One lady gave this story. She says, I remember being 8 years old in vacation Bible school, sitting in a circle, and the teacher held up 2 boxes. One was beautifully wrapped with a bow and everything. The other box was charred and smoking. And she said, there are 2 boxes. This box is heaven. This box is hell. You have a choice as to which box you will open, which box you will enter. When you die, you will go to one of these boxes and you will be there forever and ever and ever. The word forever just hung like a sword over those children. And the message was very clear to those 8-year-olds. Accept Jesus into your heart right now or burn forever. And what child is not going to raise their hand and say the prayer? I wonder how many of us became a Christian in that context of fear. Now, I want to be careful because fear of consequences is a legitimate thing. We teach our children not to run out into the street because we want to make them aware of the consequences. But when our relationship with God is built on fear and not on love, when we follow Jesus as a fire insurance policy instead of a reason that we're being drawn to Jesus because of his way of life, then something very essential gets lost. The late Rachel Held Evans said this: we've made the gospel about going to heaven when we die, when Jesus made it about bringing heaven to earth while we live. That brings us to one of the most powerful death scenes in the Christian scripture. Jesus is on the cross. It's recorded in Luke chapter 23, and you remember the story. There's one thief on one side and another thief on the other side. And here we have one of those thieves, a man who literally has no time to be baptized. He has no time to go to confirmation class. He can't get off the cross and walk and live and show that he's got a changed life. He's dying, and he's next to Jesus, and he simply says to Jesus, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus says, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Do y'all know the importance of a comma? This has the comma. What's that? No. Well, punctuation is a big thing for some of us. And this is how important it is, the use of a comma. Let's eat, Grandma. Or let's eat, Grandma. So in this passage, we need to understand that the Greek New Testament had no punctuation. In fact, it was originally written all in capital letters, and it just kind of ran into each other, all the words. Didn't put the punctuation until 500-600 years later. And so in this verse, some scholars say, truly I tell you, comma, today you will be with me in paradise. Others say, truly I tell you today that you will be with me in paradise. Which one do you think it is? If you were translating number 1 or number 2? You think it's 2? That's good. It could be. Some people think it's 1. I don't know how Jesus said it. I just know that Jesus was making a promise to this guy. Jesus said, today you will be with me in paradise, to the response of, remember me when you're in your kingdom. I remember thinking as a kid, reading this story, especially around Easter, because I was always taught you had to say the prayer, what we call the sinner's prayer, in order to become a Christian and for Jesus to be in your heart. This guy did not say the sinner's prayer. He just says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Not once did this guy ask forgiveness of his sins. And that was part of the sinner's prayer. I remember praying with children as a pastor. And if they didn't say, forgive me of my sin, I'd have them go back and do it again. There's no recognition on this guy's part that Jesus was going to be raised from the dead. That was a part of the sinner's prayer. What does this tell us about death and life after death? Maybe it tells us that God's grace and God's love is a lot bigger than our formulas. That his grace is much more generous than our methods. Maybe that his mercy is much wider than what we have been taught. Paul gives us another beautiful image in Ephesians chapter 1, where he writes about God's plan being to unite all things in him, things that are in heaven and things that are on earth. Those first four words, to unite all things, in the Greek language is one gigantic word. And it really does mean to bring things together. It's almost like taking the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle and bringing them all together until you have this picture. That's what that word means. Denise is an expert at puzzles. She can put together 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and thoroughly enjoy herself. There was one time I looked at a piece of the puzzle for 20 minutes, realized I was looking at it upside down, and it was a part of a different puzzle altogether. Whatever metaphor hits you, Chidi's metaphor, the Buddhist metaphor, a wave going back to the ocean, a piece of the puzzle being brought together. I'm wondering if that's what Paul means here. That God's ultimate plan is to bring all the pieces of which you were already a part of the puzzle. We're just kind of separated. All of this coming back together to make one beautiful picture. One of the stories that the doctor who studies NDEs told about was Catherine Glenn. She experienced an NDE from a respiratory infection that she got while she was in the hospital after going through surgery. She's only 27 years old, and she said this about that NDE. The enormity of this event had such an impact on my life. It opened windows and doors to me that I never knew existed. I was shown that religions are like jars of jelly on a shelf, only each jar had a different label put there by man. It's all jelly. It's all sweet. There are many paths up the mountain to reach God, and it really doesn't matter which one you take, because when you get there to that mountaintop, it's all the same: love, light, peace, harmony, gratitude, wisdom, truth, and victory for everybody. There are no religions in heaven. There's just jelly. Yeah. Dennis and Diane Barr gave me this morning a can or a jar of blackberry jam. I do receive gifts. That is true. And I should have brought it out here to show people. It's just a beautiful illustration. What do those explanations of death do to you? Do those, a wave going back to the ocean, a piece of the puzzle going back to the picture, a jar of jelly, it's all sweet and love, do those give you peace, or do they stir up an evangelical anger? Because it's so different than what we were taught, maybe in the evangelical church. You know, at the venues, we hold values that give space to that kind of question. We don't have rigid answers. We don't have any answers at all, hardly. But what we do have is intellectual humility that allows us to look at these questions without judgment, with curiosity, and with skepticism even from what we were taught or what I believe now. To look at everything that we believe with skepticism and wonder. Now, we don't have the answers, but that's okay. This is really not, to me, death is not about some people going to heaven and some people going to hell. What it is to me, it's about the ultimate reconciliation of all things, in the words of Paul. It's about a cosmic reunion where every wave goes back to the ocean. It is about the pieces of the puzzle of which you're already a part coming together into a beautiful picture. So what I would love for us to do is trust the mystery. Your piece belongs in God's great puzzle, even when you can't see the whole picture. Theologian Barbara Holmes, I referred to her last week. She was on Richard Rohr's staff, and she died a few months ago, said, "There's no such thing as separateness. We are already one. Only ego, our ideology, and our fear keep us apart." So here we are at the end of our journey with the good place. And into that great mystery that awaits us all. You know, that man at the beginning of the teaching who wondered about his wife Shirley, hoping she might visit him. he was asking the right question. He didn't ask, will I pass the test? Am I good enough? Do I believe the right things? He was looking for Shirley to come visit him. Maybe what he was asking is, will love find me? That's really what we're all wanting. Maybe the point is not to figure it all out. Maybe the point is just to live with our open heart and open hands, to wonder instead of worry, to love instead of hate and fear, to trust that whatever is next, God, according to 1 John chapter 4, is love. That's the essence of God. And this God who is love is going to hold me now, going to hold me then, and will never let me go.